Good afternoon, Chair Harrington, Commissioner Fye. So we are just waiting on Commissioner Rogers and Commissioner Willie.
Clerk Moss, I see Commissioner Willie in the attendee list.
Welcome, Commissioner Willie. And with that, Madam Chair, we'll hand it over to you to start.
Thank you, Clerk Moss. Welcome everyone to the Tuesday, June 28th, 2022 Washington County Board of Commissioners work session. This is Chair Catherine Harrington, and with me today is Commissioner Nafisa Fye and Commissioner Jerry Willie. Commissioner Treese is excused, she's on vacation. And it looks like Commissioner Roy Rogers is joining us momentarily. There he is. So the first item on the agenda is board and leadership communication. Who would like to go first?
Well,
Go ahead, Commissioner Fye.
hello. Hi, Chair Harrington, commissioners. I apologize for having my camera off. Their IT is working on fixing hopefully this soon, but seems like my camera isn't working. It was working yesterday, but it's not working today. So, but I'm
We can
here.
hear you loud and
I'm
clear.
here. I'm here and healthy and looking well, everyone. I last week was a very light week because I decided to take a few days off, and Monday being a holiday and the short week, so I don't really have anything to report other than my camera issues, and look forward to this week. I did, however, attended some great community events over the weekend. The Family Justice Center of Washington County at their fundraiser was my first time attending, and it was very well organized and very well attended and very well fundraised. I think I left without finding out the number of dollars they raised, but it was a really great event, and uh, um, just a wonderful, and look forward to getting to know more of that organization and how I can support as a commissioner, because I was really inspired the stories and the work that they do, and hearing and learning more about their own executive director and some of the board members. Congratulations, the Washington County Family Justice Center, on your great event, and look forward to next year. And hopefully we can, as a county, we can have a table there and to help that organization. And then it was also Pride weekend for Beaverton here, and my kids and I were able to stop by in the afternoon. We couldn't obviously participate in the parade, but it looked really well, Chair Harrington. I saw you on social media. So great events. I'll turn it to the next commissioners.
Yeah, I'll be glad to go next. Nafisa, thank you for attending that Family Justice Center event on Saturday night. There isn't a tally yet that I could communicate an amount raised, but it was a very, very successful event and certainly a lot of fun. So thank you for being there as well. Probably the biggest thing I did last week was go to the Association of Oregon and California Counties field trip. We were invited to go down and see just a small portion of the Beachy Creek fire, which, as you know, was in Sandy M Canyon. And we didn't go as far east as Detroit Lake, but certainly saw enough of the damage that the fire did, and what recovery efforts have been going on now in actually in year 2. And the interesting thing was, I think, understanding how a fire of this significance impacts a fairly broad swath of both private and public and individual environments. Of course, the freeze, FRE RES is a lumber company that had a lot of the land there that they were either getting ready to harvest or had planted over the last 10 or 15 years. And I think that's kind of what we forget about when we think about a forest fire. We think it's burning mature trees. Well, in this particular case, it was a significant amount of acreage that had been reforested, and some of it was 10 years. And so the trees were 10, 12 feet high. And the reason why you knew how tall they were, because there was nothing but sticks left from those plantings. And then there was a fairly large area that had plantings from just a few years ago, so much smaller. But so all of that will be reforested, costs a lot of money to do that. And certainly the lumber companies that are invested and involved in reforesting and certainly harvesting any trees that are out there were impacted by that. So we appreciate their investment. Also heard from Marion County commissioners as to how their county is investing in some of those areas as well. So it is really impactful when you can actually walk amongst the ruins, see the damages of households. There were 5 lives lost.
Am I the only one?
Quickly the forest regenerates itself. So so it's interesting to see all of that. Did you have a
Commissioner
question,
Willie, I think the internet froze on you. So your audio came through mostly. So we got it.
So maybe Nafisa's camera issues are actually coming over on mine too. So it's her fault. My internet is a problem. Is that what we're going to do? Anyway, so it was a great event, and it's also an opportunity for commissioners from several counties to get together and just have conversation about how these fires impact their individual counties. As you all know, the Live Golf Tournament at a Pumpkin, can't hardly miss that. Tomorrow is their pro-am, and then through the weekend, and we certainly have plenty of news articles to talk about that. I just had lunch with Kim Shuey from Community Action, and it was a great lunch just to catch up on what their priorities are, and certainly from what the county's perspective and some of our challenges are. Have a meeting with Andrew McGow from WSI Work Systems Inc. Coming up, and then the PBA, Portland Business Association annual meeting is coming up as well. So I'll be attending those events. So that's all I got.
Wonderful. How about you, Commissioner Rogers?
I can jump in, Jerry. I'll tease you a little bit. Susan McLean was speaking at the Washington County Chamber yesterday and kept breaking up the entire time, just like you're breaking up. It's hard to hear you. So your broadband, rural broadband initiative is really, really needed, I can assure you.
They each live within city boundaries.
Yep, they do, but I think your proposal is not only rural, but countywide, so that's good. Yeah, I heard that you did a very nice job on television the other day, Commissioner Willie. I didn't see you, my wife did, but she said that you came across very well in regard to the Live tournament. So you don't get a lot of feedback probably that way, but I'd share that with you. I was unable to make that Saturday night Denim and Diamonds event, but a certain commissioner's spouse hit me up for some money for that, so I was there, and I was there in spirit last Wednesday. Interesting meeting on the Metro RTP Council. I'm not involved in any of the panels, but I listen in. And the whole kind of demand management conversation and what that really means in terms of how we're going to size certain facilities is a very good conversation, and keeping my eye on that one. And that brings us to yesterday at the Hillsborough, old habits, the Washington County Chamber, their Transportation Task Force had extensive conversations regarding the I-5 with Susan McLean. It was interesting to hear her perspective as well as a chat about that bridge and how they feel about it. And I can tell you that what I've heard from chambers in my neck of the woods is not too dissimilar. So seems to be some common themes about what they'd like to see. So that's it. Other than I had a nice lunch.
And
With,
what might those themes be, Commissioner Rogers?
do you all want to hear right now? I'd be happy to say.
You bet.
Yeah, well, what I stressed, I had a little bit of time to talk, and what I stress is that you got to fix a 100-year-old bridge. I mean, that thing has got wood timbers under it. So there's no question about that. There's no question that Susan, who's been there a long time, as well as Metro Council, is not only is she representing her area well, she also understands the regional significance of the facility as well as the statewide significance of the facility. So she's well poised to deal with this. I commend her. Now, the themes. The themes are that even though there's limited funding, we ought to look at how expansion could happen in the future. And I would say on our letter today when we're talking about it, the only disappointing things I have is that we don't have any aspirational issues in terms of, I would love to see the light rail go further north. We don't have the money, but I would love to see that happen. And as far as the expansion of the bridge, everyone that is in the business community, chamber communities, are saying there has to be some understanding that could happen at some time, versus just having a limited number of lanes. I think it's going to be difficult to find funding for that, and I've stated that, but I certainly understand that aspirational needs, but that's exactly where they were at. So we can talk about that more. But anyway, that's all I have.
Chair, we can't hear you.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Rogers. I'll go next or last. Last week, I attended, participated in a webinar on improving the outcomes for youth involved in multiple systems of care. This is one of the training opportunities that has been made available to us from our juvenile justice team. It was really helpful to hear more about new techniques for looking at youth who are part of the child welfare system and how efforts can be made to ensure that agency departments are working proactively together across the systems of care, being juvenile justice and child welfare, for better outcomes. As you all know, we had our second quarter town hall on Thursday night. It was always useful to hear further information from our team on services for older adults, but also to hear community questions. Thank you to everyone from staff, including from our adult services teams, for preparing for that and helping us all learn more. Last Thursday, I had the monthly chair mayors meeting. I want to thank Ms. Angie and Mr. Carr, as well as Sheriff Garrett and Chief Deputy Roque, for attending to hear the Q&A from different mayors about the traffic control that will be in place for that activity. I always get it wrong. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I always get it messed up. So anyway, it's coming. I also checked in with them on a few topics of potential interest. such as their interest in marijuana delivery across communities. No interest in enabling that, as well as checking in with them on the opt-out provision, potential provision with regard to psilocybin citing. So only a few of them are moving forward with that work, and Mr. Carr and his team are bringing information forward for us. So we'll have the opportunity to learn more and make decisions in the future. Then on Saturday, on behalf of the two commissioners who were not able to make the TV Highway Steering Committee bus tour, I attended that on our behalf. And originally it was going to be done on one of the TriMet electric buses, but instead it was on their upcoming FX bus, which is the renewable diesel articulated 60-foot bus. So it was quite an experience to take that bus from the Beaverton Transit Center out to the Forest Grove Transit Center, and in the Forest Grove Transit Center to see it fill the whole transit center curb to curb. 60 feet is pretty darn large, and that's a pretty small transit center. Anyway, it was a good tour. I learned more about how Pacific and Western has changed their position with regard to the allowable use within the right of way, and has changed their support from historically they have allowed 12-foot and 15-foot use of the right of way for various Line 57 bus shelters, and their lawyers now want to standardize on just 5 feet. So the parties are working through all of that because there are a couple of stops that are impacted, and it's a pretty tight right of way. Then on yesterday with the Tri-County Chairs meeting, only 2 of us could attend, but as you can see in the notes, we had a conversation about the, oh, sorry, I misread my own notes. I'll get to that in a second. Yesterday morning, we had the Supportive Housing Services Oversight discussion, not a meeting, but a discussion amongst the committee about what they would like to potentially see out of the future annual reports, as well as community engagement. So they're working through that. Similar but different, as we know from prior work sessions and board meetings with our staff, as well as one-on-ones, an element of the Supportive Housing Services Program, the Tri-County Planning Body. Oh, excuse me, I have a sneeze. The Tri-County Planning Body, which is a subset, a committee set up to work on the regional systems alignment standards and metrics. That committee has been appointed by the Metro Council as of May 5th, but we've had some really scattered phone calls about assigning co-chairs for that committee, which brings me to the following discussion I wanted to have with you. And Clerk Moss, if we could ask for your assistance. You may recall or not, I needed to spend a little bit more time and energy myself. If you look at the email that Daniel sent last night from last night's Tri-County co-chair meeting, you'll see a link to the full roster and description of the Supportive Housing Services Tri-County Planning Body Committee. So it runs like 9 different pages because they asked each of us to answer 2 questions. Clerk Moss, I think you also have a 1-pager that has just the list of people. Because county commissioners have a link to that document in their email already. So what I'm trying to get at is, as there were conversations amongst the 3 county commissioners and the Metro Council president about co-chairs, our staff amongst the 4 jurisdictions had developed a recommendation, and that evolved so that there would be 1 representative that was really into data analysis and systems integration, and then another representative who is a service provider. And then separate from the application process for the committee, as some folks were doing their pondering on this, some second and third hand information was brought to the table. I had, I believe through our conversations, including with staff, been advocating for our co-chairs to be folks who have experience not just from Multnomah County and the city of Portland, so that at least one of the members has experience across all 3 of our counties, which I know has been something that this board has been concerned about in multiple metro committees, to make sure that there is active representation across the 3 counties. So towards that end, do we have that single page, Clerk Moss, that page Spence sent you with just the list of committee members?
No, Chair Harrington, I just got that profile of the listing of the members.
Okay, all righty. Well, so that 9-pager is a little too long to work with. So commissioners, if you can work from that link, that would be great. So the long and short of it is, I wanted to check in with you. There are a couple of different proposals being batted around about who to appoint. And one of the things I've really stood by, ensuring that we have a service provider, a co-chair who's a service provider, and that service provider have experience across the 3 counties, that firm does work across 3 counties. And there has been some criticism, as I mentioned, the second and third hand information that is not part of the steering committee selection. And so what I've pushed back on that is that I think it's inappropriate for that information to be utilized at this point, and that we need to make sure that we are not judging people in ways that have not been part of the committee selection process, and that we make sure that people who need experience are provided the opportunity to get that experience, which we know these committees many times allow for. So I'm trying to be careful here in not speaking about specific individuals, but rather to check in with you and find out if you want to give me direction to not worry about the nature of these co-chairs being entirely just or primarily just from Multnomah County and City of Portland. That's really what it boils down to. Thoughts?
I'll chime in. I read that memo that came in last night, and I agreed with your comment regarding more involvement. I guess I'll be a little parochial. Washington County, we always like to see that and not to have it simply Multnomah. But I'm a little bit confused and need some information from you in regard to the multi-county kind of experience. Would that only be a vendor, or could that be somebody else in the committee who might have it in a different type of venue? And you say, well, what would that be? Maybe they've lived in different counties. Maybe they've. I'm thinking of attorneys. I don't think they would. When I looked at the people, I didn't see one, but somebody who might represent people in different counties. What are you thinking? How would that work? Your specific issue about let's find somebody who has familiarity with each of the three counties. In what capacity? That was my question.
It would be in work that has direct relationship with this SHS committee. Not that, I mean, what we've done, you're right to raise residency, right? You're right to raise where people have work experience. Okay, because that was part of the application. What we're talking about is, or having to grapple with is one of the service providers who has a lot of great experience, but none of that experience applies to two of the three counties.
Okay. Well, a little bit of naivety on my part. I mean, I'm not as intimately involved in this as you are, but is there a pool of people who would have this kind of experience across three counties? Is that hard to find?
Well, no, they've already decided, we've already decided amongst the four governments who's going to be on the committee, and they've been appointed, right? So it's a limited pool. So we're working on co-chairs amongst that. One of the problems here is that for whatever reason, attempts to get a meeting set up have been short-circuited. And I'm like, hey, I'm perfectly willing to talk about this. And I know that there was one attempt to set up a meeting in May, and they decided to have it on a specific day and a specific time that I couldn't meet. So it's like, okay, well, have a good meeting, but that's not going to include Washington County. So they canceled that meeting, and so I've had the honor of a couple more phone calls, including from some Here Together principals. So I've continued to reflect this position based on our prior conversations and information that our staff has provided to me. So that's where that's been at. So I just wanted to check in today and make sure that this is an approach that is still in line with what you're looking for. And my hope is that we can actually have at least a Zoom meeting on this amongst the parties. Commissioner Fye?
Yes.
You've
Commissioner
raised your
Rod-
hand?
Yeah, I did. I wasn't sure if Commissioner Rogers was done.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add, thank you, Nafisa, I think your point, Chair, straight, are right on. I saw the applicants. I I don't know any of them, so I don't have any objection, and I know you're simply doing the co-chairs, but this seems like it would have been a great issue at the formation and the appointment time. We're kind of at the back end, but short of just saying that was a good idea, we're beyond our time. It seems like it would be good to reinforce that, because there will be turnover, obviously, and there always is. And maybe that's a good emphasis in the future. So I'm hoping your points are not going to be lost, because I agree with them. I'm done.
Um, Chair Harrington, I had a question for you. I understand any of the members could be nominated or could be selected to be co-chairs. Is the goal, or is there any spoken or unspoken? Because I'm trying to recall when the presentation happened from Paige at our board, that conversation, but the elected officials that are on the committee, can they be one of the co-chairs? I can hear you.
I don't know if Paige is available. It'd be great if she could, but I don't run those logistics at the moment. I do know that we had our meeting back in April. We had a work session earlier in April, and we went through the adoption at our April 26th meeting. There's Paige. Maybe her memory is better than mine, because April feels like light years ago.
Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners, and Commissioner Fye. If I understand your question correctly, was it wanting to know if the co-chair position could be offered to one of the members of the slate that I presented back in April?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So that is exactly the pool of candidates. And I know Kevin pulled it up on a slide just a few moments ago, just to show the full roster without kind of the biographical information. So yes, that is the pool of folks that we're looking at now. And so there have been some of those folks who, because of their skill sets and demographics, particularly as Chair Harrington has mentioned, pertaining to, if you will, meaning working and living in multiple counties. So there has been a pool of candidates kind of out of that larger pool that were identified as strong potential co-chairs. And so those folks have been reached out to and are able and willing to serve. And so kind of out of that roster that I had submitted in April, there are about 4 or 5 names being floated around now as co-chairs. So that is the pool. And as the chair had mentioned at the time that this was, the slate was advanced, it was coming from the staff level and all of the respective boards and commissions. And then finally Metro Council did approve that slate. At the time we had made recommendations around the co-chairs as well, but those official roles were not included in the slate in April because the communication to folks about whether they were willing and able to serve just hadn't been able to be done yet. So we were hoping to resolve it very quickly, shortly after that presentation and adoption. But for the reasons the chair has mentioned, it's just been a bit complicated to move forward. So I hope that helps answer your question. I'm here if there's any other questions or concerns.
Thank you, Paige. Yeah, that absolutely answers my question. And yeah, I don't know if I think I'm happy to support whatever direction you're thinking, Chair Harrington, in terms of how do we get somebody that can speak all 3 tri-counties. I think it's a bit of a challenge, but I'm happy to support.
So if I could, because I think what you're really getting at, Commissioner Fye, is that we want to make sure, we as Washington County want to make sure that for this regional committee, and that is really the double emphasis of this tri-county planning body. Remember, we do still have the Supportive Housing Services Oversight Committee, which it too is regional. This is a very specific charter, and we all agreed to it. The Metro Council adopted it on May 5th. That we want to make sure we've got a good regional co-chairs that have some have regional experience and viewpoints. And what I'm hearing is continued support for that approach.
Absolutely. Very well said.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Willie, what are your thoughts? If you have any, you don't. Okay, okay.
Well, I'm letting you and Nafisa and Roy lead this conversation because I'm on the periphery of this. So go right ahead.
Okay, all righty. Well, I'm sorry it took so long for me to get to it more crisply, but thank you very much for that direction. Appreciate it. So we'll move on then, or Commissioner Fye, your hand is still up. Do you have something more?
I am so sorry. No,
It's
I'm done.
okay. I feel like I'm
Oh, my
talking to a
goodness.
black box. So
I know. Oh my gosh. Never ending story.
it's okay. You're here in audio spirit. We get it. Okay, leadership communication, Ms. Angie, you're first.
Good afternoon, Chair Harrington and board. And sorry, my mouse was asleep. So sometimes after it sits for a while, doesn't want to wake up. So I did want to update the board on our response to hot weather this past weekend brought the start of our summer heat, which coincided with the anniversary of the 2021 heat dome. As we all recall, it feels sometimes just like yesterday. Our county departments are working together to ensure that we are ready to help our community during extreme heat events so that people have up-to-date information to prepare places to cool off across the county and access to life-saving resources like air conditioning. The county's response last weekend's heat event was determined by a combination of level moderate and high risk areas. That combination was in place during the day, and then in the evening we were at moderate. So we did not activate the overnight sheltering. And we do monitor this close. I will say we were on the cusp of actually activating overnight sheltering. And I do want to just share that piece of information because we all feel heat. And so it's also applying the data and the metrics so that we understand what triggers are in place is really important for us to manage these situations. This weekend also brought our first yearly reminder that as temperatures rise, so does air pollution in the form of smog or ground level ozone. On Monday, June 27th, the Department of Environmental Quality issued an air quality advisory for Portland metro area, advising people to limit emission causing behaviors like driving, mowing lawns, painting, and using aerosols that contribute to unhealthy air quality. Air quality has improved today as we've found heat relief. So 'tis this time of year that I will be bringing updates to the board, either by board leadership or through emails, so that you stay informed on what actions we're taking in partnership with other jurisdictions. During summer also comes water safety season, and especially as we head into the July 4th weekend. I'd like to remind the board of the work being done to underscore the importance of water safety. Washington County has joined with other public jurisdictions throughout the region in highlighting water safety, such as wearing personal flotation devices, no matter what level of swimming ability you may have. We're thankful for the work of facilities and park services and the sheriff's office in promoting boating safety requirements and ensuring compliance for the thousands of visitors to Scoggins Valley Park each year. Please look forward to and ask that we would help us in amplifying the county safety messages as we head into the long weekend. Fireworks. As a reminder, Washington County continues to work cooperatively with our local jurisdictions with urging public to refrain from using fireworks this Independence Day. We are asking our community members to observe professional fireworks displays instead. And we stay in constant communication with TVFNR to really monitor the red flag warning. And in our most recent correspondence, we do not anticipate, due to our current weather conditions, that will be in place this year. And with that concludes my update. I do want to let the board know that as of Friday afternoon, I will be on vacation visiting my family in Minnesota for a week. And so Aaron Calvert will be acting on my behalf during that time.
Wonderful. And don't worry, folks, I haven't forgotten about our IBR letter. So we will come back to that after leadership communication. Thank you. Mr. Carr, how about you?
Good afternoon, Chair Harrington and Board. I have some litigation updates. We seem to be in a season where we're getting sued a lot, and who knows why. Yesterday, about a year ago, there was a newspaper article about a lawsuit filed by a former deputy seeking $1 million against the county, Garrett Garland and Patrick Altieri. Yesterday, Judge Sims dismissed almost all of those claims. He left one defamation claim, which we'll attempt to resolve. And I want to thank John Mansfield for his excellent work on that. Also yesterday, the Judge Sims denied Ridwell's motion for preliminary injunction to enjoin the county's additional recycling program. So that program will go ahead starting July 1st, Friday. The judge directed that we file dispositive motions immediately. We have a deadline to file our motion by July 11th. So he wants to resolve that case as soon as possible. I learned this morning that, as you know, the county has been sued by Mr. Polonsky to challenge Ordinance 878. That lawsuit was dismissed. There was a second lawsuit by Mr. Schwartz challenging the ordinance where there's a preliminary injunction motion pending that will be decided later in the month. We learned this morning that a third lawsuit is planned on behalf of the tobacco industry challenging 878 in federal court under Section 1983, which is federal civil rights claim. I will keep you updated when I get this. There'll, of course, I expect to be a newspaper article about it in the coming days, and we will defend. I will have the lead handling that litigation. In addition, I wanted to inform the board that we have filled the positions of Deputy County Counsel that the board authorized last year. I'm pleased to announce that Brad Anderson and Courtney Dreesen will be serving as Deputy County Counsels to provide succession and additional management ability in our office. I'm very pleased and excited that they're willing to take this on. And as you all know, Brad has been essentially working in that job for a couple of years, helping me and supporting Alan as he has. So I really appreciate the fact that the commission approved those positions and that Courtney and Brad are willing to fill them. You'll get to congratulate Courtney yourself. She'll be presenting later this evening. And then finally, I want to thank you all. Today is my 1-year anniversary with the county, and I'm thrilled with all the support and kindness that you have showed me through this year, and look forward to many coming in the forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you again for joining us, and I'm glad you're getting to enjoy some of your favorite parts of legal work with litigation. So I'm glad that that is a particular area of interest of yours. So wonderful. Mr. Jockers, thank you for being here to represent Clean Water Services.
Thank you, Chair Harrington, members of Clean Water Services Board of Directors. I am sitting in for Diane, who is out recovering from COVID. I did speak to her today. She is feeling better, which is good. And as a result, we are delaying that executive session this afternoon on performance. So that'll be good. A couple of things we wanted to point out as we pulled item number 6 on the agenda. We've talked to the clerk on that. So we'll be pulling that. It's one of the 5 chemical contracts that we have. We did get a protest on that, so our procurement team has pulled that off, and we will bring it back to you later. The other piece that I'd like to share with you is last Thursday, we shared a privy council with the board. One of the things we highlighted in there, and this speaks to the weather, as Tanya was talking about, is we started releasing water from Hague Lake on Wednesday, the 22nd, when it was 75 degrees. Because we knew that it was going to be probably 90 and actually closer to 100 over the weekend. So Our release season from flows from Hague Lake started last Wednesday. In contrast, in 2021, we started on May 3rd. So we've had a much wetter spring. That'll allow us to kind of meter out that water from the lake through the year to provide that cooling effect to the river itself. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Mr. Jockers, I have to apologize. I seem to have misplaced that in my inbox. If you could resend that to me, I'd greatly appreciate it because they're always so informative. Oh, Commissioner Fye, we lost your camera again. It was on for a little bit. Darn. All righty. We do have a draft letter. Oh, it's back. Yay. We do have a draft letter for our consideration. It's in our packet. It is a letter addressed to the co-chairs of the Joint Committee on Transportation. I thought it might also go to the OTC in advance of their upcoming July meeting. This was a letter that co-chair Representative Susan McLean had requested that we consider putting forward and communicating our support for the modified local preferred alternative. Is it local preferred alternative or locally preferred alternative? I'm learning the terms of art.
Locally.
I'm used to LPA, but
Yeah, local preferred alternative, I think, modified local preferred alternative.
okay. Well, welcome to Ms. Erin Doyle, our Director of Government Relations. No,
Senior government relations manager.
Thank you. Thank you. Subject matter expert in government relations, for sure, as well as Christine Defabach from, and Mr. Roberts, the Director of Land Use and Transportation. Thank you. So commissioners, what do you think of the draft letter? Our intent is pretty simple, to weigh in support of the work that the various committees have done to develop the modified LPA and to ensure that the process continues to move forward. Thoughts? Commissioner Rogers, if you wanted to kick us off again too, or go ahead.
Sure, either way. Well, thank you. I'm conflicted, especially listening to I guess Susan is a co-chair, and her comments yesterday were very different than what I anticipated. I think we all understand we got to do a new bridge. I mean, if you've lived in the area for more than about 6 months, you understand it's an old bridge and we need to fix it. We all get that. And so as far as approval of a new bridge, we should be doing that. The challenges are that for me, two things. One, there's no aspirational paragraph in there, which would have been nice. And what do you say aspirational? I get it. What is it, $3 billion or something? We don't, it's a lot of money. But it'd be nice if we could encourage those who are yet to come to various senatorial and congressional districts that, the region has needs, including Clark County, that go into the future. So there's nothing mentioned about light rail that would go north. I know it's not part of the project. I know it's not funded, but that's my aspirational, that it would move north. The other thing that Susan McLean was saying yesterday, and I think it was resonating with the business community, is that we understand, and I was at that listening to the meeting Metro meeting last week on demand management, that's not a preferred position by a lot of people. What they would like to see is, even though there may not be funds available, that there be design features or capabilities to expand in the future as either the area grows or there are additional revenue. But to be silent on that and then have the demand management conversation going simultaneously implies that there's no interest in any expansion ever, and that's not going to be something that people consider. Now, um, I don't think that's where anybody is, but I mean, messaging is everything, and so our letter, though it's probably not even necessary. I know Susan wanted it, but it seems like we could be a little bit more clear about as funds in the future or as design if it's possible. I haven't thought through any wording, to be honest with you. That's for great wordsmiths like you, but those are the two issues that I have in my mind.
Well, I let our team know a couple of weeks ago that having such a letter is something that is desired, and the committee meeting date is set, and we don't have a meeting next week. So we find ourselves in the situation of really needing to get on this today. As you note, there are many different things still to be worked out as well as to be funded. Those are very well known. I don't think it's necessary for us to add a voice reiterating those same things. Uh, um,
I would say, just to respond, that Susan yesterday encouraged, and the chambers, they're going to have bigger meetings. Paul Savas was there from Clackamas County, as well as his transportation person, and they're going back to their chambers, and they're all going to encourage this by-state committee, as well as legislative folks, to consider expansion. She spoke very eloquently about expansion of the bridge and the capacity, and she said that would be very helpful if others would speak to that as well. That caught me off guard. That's what I said. I was a little bit surprised. I didn't expect that she'd be saying that, understanding the constraints and the dollars and all the rest of the studies. But I don't know. I'll just stop, because it was a very interesting conversation and thoughts that she had.
Well, and I have no doubt that the chambers will be successful in exercising their voice at this time, and the process will continue, and there will be a future opportunity for all of us to hear that voice in different forms and to see if we choose to amplify it or not. So thank you for sharing that in a timely manner with us.
And
Commissioner Willie, go right ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm going to stay with kind of the same theme as Roy, because that's what I've been hearing as well. I wasn't able to attend that transportation meeting with Representative McLean, but I certainly got feedback on that. And I've heard a couple of presentations on this project as well, and I think that we as a county, even though the chambers are going to be pretty, I think, vocal about what their ask is going to be, and we can call it aspirational, but I think we as a county have a larger voice, and I think we need to be communicating a stronger message that is supportive of her. And I just felt like this letter was just a little bit too benign in that regards. So I would like to have, I don't know how much of a challenge it would be if we would ask Stephen and Chris and Aaron to put together a paragraph or something where we are saying we need to be looking more into the future and evaluating capacity, auxiliary lanes, whatever it is, but we need to be looking at
That's outside of the scope of the modified LPA, though.
I understand that, and that's where we are right now, is outside that. We are communicating a message, and I think that's what I think we should be doing, is communicating the message. If there was one thing that I really felt like was why the previous endeavor on this bridge several years ago failed, is because there wasn't any, I guess, input from us neighboring folks out here. And so I think we need to be very clear about that. We appreciate and support where we are right now, but looking ahead, we also feel like there needs to be other issues addressed as Representative McLean has requested.
So I think that you've got history wrong. We as a board have already sent a letter and weighed in with regard to JPACT on the modified LPA, which includes this design, which does not have additional auxiliary lanes. So what you're proposing is, I believe, a change in position. The prior design under the CRC did have things like auxiliary lanes. And what the then Hillsborough Chamber's position was, is they didn't like the cost. It, like what Commissioner Rogers says, that CRC did go up to Clark County Community College, but with this modified design, the light rail will follow a different alignment. So, if our position is to change, we don't have to weigh in on a letter to the Joint Committee at this juncture. But I just want to make sure we're all of the same understanding with regard to where the project is. So, and also keep in mind that if this is a topic instead of a short letter, then we'll need to take it off of line for further conversation. And it's also one reason why I asked for this a couple of weeks ago. So Commissioner Fye, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Chair Harrington. I think Stephen Roberts were going to say something. Stephen, would you want to chime in?
Yeah, my comment was really going to be more housekeeping. We are working with the folks at IBR and reaching out. I think Aaron's reached out to Representative McLean just to clarify who's the most appropriate group to address a letter to. So is it the Bi-State Commission that's looking at the IBR specifically, or the Oregon Joint Committee on Transportation, or both? So we're working through finalization of that topic. I do think to the point, I think we could easily craft a sentence or something if there's a consensus among the board to acknowledge that concern that I think we've been hearing voiced about providing or exploring some opportunities for future capacity expansion on a structure, going forward, and or to Commissioner Rogers' question or comment about light rail. But I also tend to agree with you, Chair, that the letter sort of stands on its own. If the question that was put to us was, do we support the modified LPA, the sense that we took away from the prior work session was that, yes, the board did support it.
And if I may, Chair, I would also say that we need to remember where in the process we are as far as getting the Bi-State committee to sign off on this modified LPA. Puts us in the next step becomes the environmental impact statement that would review this, which would include questions as to have you sufficiently created the capacity necessary to meet the environmental needs using this bridge. And as far as the light rail goes, that is a compromise that takes down one of the political barriers to having this pass on the Washington side. So for the housekeeping purposes, I think that the appropriate audience for this is the Bi-State committee. And it is to allow them to take the next step so that we can then go into the draft environmental impact statement and allow that community voice to take place within that to talk about capacity, sizing, future planning, and all of those steps. So the modified local preferred alternative is very early stage, is not complete design. It is not the end of that conversation. It is in fact the way we get to the next step. So thus the tone of the letter.
Yeah.
Well, if I could just chime in again, and Aaron, you did a great job of outlining that, and thank you very much for giving me the next steps process that we do in there. At the same time, I'd still like to see us just add a sentence or two that says, as we move ahead, in this planning process that we would take into consideration whatever it is, capacity modifications, whatever it is, just so that we're just putting in there kind of the aspirational statement that Roy talked about. So we're not just saying, you know, we're in agreement where we are right now, and so and we don't have any aspirations for modifications to this or whatever the case. I just don't want it to be communicated that we're perfectly happy with the bridge as it currently is designed. We'd like them to continue to consider other issues that need to be addressed. And I don't know how we go about doing that, but that's just my request.
Yeah, I think we could add a sentence.
I believe what Ms. Doyle articulated is that we're at the modified LPA stage. An EIS is done on a preferred alternative. So this is about, we can't, after this stage, then reopen the project and be adding what she described was the EIS has to meet the capacity needs as part of the demand for this facility. So it's essentially, it's going to be a pass or it's going to be a fail. And the whole design won't be reopened for additional capacity after this point. So what I'm trying to get at is these statements of aspiration are in conflict with the further narrowing of the project, so we can either get to something built within the federal process to use the design costs that have gone into this project from the past, or all of that will expire. We have to throw it away, and future generations will have to redo this project. So I'm just trying to be cognizant of where the project is and where it's trying to land, and bringing in other aspirations isn't, as I understand, going to help us in this process.
If I may make a recommendation on how we can address this, I would recommend adding a quick phrase to the final line or the third paragraph, so that it would state, it will also allow work to continue to refine the interstate bridge project through the supplemental draft environmental impact statement process to create a fully functioning transportation system. With that would address a lot of the concerns that I think we've heard here, and really refocus us back on the functionality of the system meeting the term here.
What does that mean? You tell me what you just said. What, in your mind, what does that mean?
Concentrating on making sure that the design functions to meet the needs of the community, and getting all types of modal uses through across the bridge with reduced congestion, and safe transit and safe bike ped. So all of those modes are able to move through this bridge per the design.
The only point that I would make, and maybe it's to what Jerry's getting at, again, as I told you, I'm conflicted. I understand the EIS process. I've been through it hundreds of times. We have always scoped expansion in most projects. We understand that, and we've never deliberately not scoped for expansion. And that's, I think, the message that's of concern. The feds understand that. Every time we do a light rail, we don't say this is all it's ever going to be. I mean, we try to make connections and design in such a fashion that it can be another route. We always, with roads, look at other alternatives. In this particular instance, what we're hearing from communities, and frankly, they have voices with their legislative folks too, just like we do. They're saying, we understand that it is what it is. We want you to move forward, so we're not saying stop the process. We're not saying that this isn't a good start, but is there any way you can craft messages to say, you know, that future needs, you know, that we're not going to prohibit that. And you're going to say, well, that'll kill the project. The IS can't be done. Well, sure it can. We can say, well, we may need this, so we may need to expand, even if it's not the roadway, you might have a footprint of land that you'd acquire on either side so that you can land additional lanes. Or you could design in such a fashion, weight bearing, that you could accommodate additional concrete. If you design only for what's there and you can never hang another lane or you can never expand the roadway, this thing is doomed, in my opinion. And so that's what I was hearing. And Suzanne, you know, was saying she supports more roadway, and she'd like to hear that. And so I never expected that message from her. That was really surprising to me yesterday. And that's what I was hearing from the business community. So if you think that we're getting at it, Aaron, by your comment, then maybe we are, you know, by that little word change. But
I'm not signing on to a letter that infers we're trying to change the modified LPA beyond what they're talking about. And, you know, I take you at your word, Commissioner Rogers, that when you say that Representative McLean was saying that she's in favor of additional lane capacity on that bridge. But I mean, we're not going to, the five of us are not the committee working on the design. And we can either choose to agree on a letter to support the modified locally preferred alternative, which was her ask of me, and which I asked staff to draft a letter for our consideration, or we can move on and just not do it.
well, much as you don't feel comfortable, I listened very intently yesterday, and I questioned her. If there are 3 votes, then that's great. Why don't you accept the letter as is? So that's where I would be today.
Sorry. If I could chime in, Chair Harrington, I think Chris and Stephen, the letter is in line some of the conversation that's been happening at JPAC and what we've been hearing. So staff did a really good job of striking a balance with that letter as somebody who's been attending some of the conversations. I wasn't at the conversation with Representative McLean, but I think what Aaron offered, it's really a good solution to facilitate how we address capacity issues, specifically to Commissioner Willie's question around capacity. I think that's a really good way to facilitate the opportunity to have more of that conversation at the environmental assessment piece. Are we all comfortable with that, or I'm comfortable with that, so thumbs up for me.
I am. Commissioner Willie, how about you? You're
So
unmuted.
you're comfortable with Aaron's additional sentence there? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
As I heard it, yes. What I wasn't
Okay.
agreeing to is what Commissioner Rogers was summarizing that it led to.
Okay. Aaron, did you write that down? Because I'd like you to read that again, or was that off the top of your head?
It was fairly much off the top of my head. I think I can recreate it as I'm writing it down right now. But essentially, this sentence would state, it will also allow work to continue to refine the Interstate Bridge project through the supplemental draft environmental impact statement process to create a functional regional transportation bridge, or not transportation, regionally functional bridge.
System, you had the word system or network in there.
Yeah, it was a full, I wrote it down.
Thank you, Chris.
Fully, to create a fully functioning transportation system. And I was going to suggest adding to meet our long-term needs or something, because I think that was your concerns. And they're planning for that. They're planning for that already. And that's what the work ahead of them is going to do.
I would agree with that. So
How about this?
Yeah.
Let staff go work on a new draft. And before we close the work session, we'll be able to see what we're agreeing to sign on or not.
Okay.
Okay, we don't need more cooks in the kitchen.
Right.
Awesome. Thank you, staff.
Right.
Next, for formal agenda items, I know I usually forget to do this part. We have just been informed that one item for tonight's agenda on the consent agenda is being pulled by Clean Water Services. So the consent agenda will have 16 items. Are there any questions on anything else on the consent agenda? I mean, the formal agenda, the whole thing.
So Chair Harrington, if I may, I was just notified of an additional change of the added item C17. Staff has informed me it is being pulled because the homeowner has voluntarily agreed with the recommendation of the county. So that item is no longer needed. So what we have is...
That's really good.
Yeah, so we'll have 15 items on the consent agenda, and then we have the added item under presentations for D1. I believe that is all the changes for tonight, or our boards and commissions for D1.
So we had D1.
Yes.
So what we now have is an additional presentation for D1.
No, it's just that board and commission from last week. So.
Okay, let's all get clear. Yesterday's agenda included D1 is what I'm trying to say.
Correct.
Okay, so I was trying to summarize what has changed since yesterday.
Correct.
Okay. Compared to our original posted agenda, I'm going to go back further. C16 was added. We no longer have a C17. We do have an added D1, and there will and forget the last part I was about to say. I have a question on item F3 on the attachment homeless camp removal policy. I would like to see in the very first paragraph a few words added. As of yesterday's packet, it was on page 879 of 881. I can't tell you what packet there is today. We haven't received any notices of changes. So on page 879 of 881, had the attachment titled Homeless Camp Removal Policy. And that very first paragraph, pursuant to ORS 195.550-195.510, the following policy is adopted by Washington County governing homeless individual camping on public property. I would like to see clarifying language within urban unincorporated areas and rural unincorporated areas, because this does not pertain to cities. We are not establishing a policy that applies to the cities. And nowhere in the resolution and order, nor in this attachment to it, makes that clear. Mr. Carr, would that be acceptable to legal?
Yes, Chair Harrington.
Commissioners, do you have any thoughts? I'm just really concerned that the reader is going to think this applies to the whole geography of Washington County, which it doesn't. So we should say so. That's all. It could have just as easily been said unincorporated areas. But I went back to other information, including in this very same packet, and it is clear. So that's why I was trying to leverage those words. Any other thoughts? So, Mr. Carr, I assume I'm going to need to make that amendment request in the meeting.
Well, Your Honor, sorry, Your Honor. Chair Harrington, we can, I'm practicing too much. We can just prepare it and have it proposed as suggested by the amendment this afternoon.
Okay.
So, and I'll ask Ms. Dutriesen, who's handling it, to do that.
That would be great.
Yeah, my preference would be to do that, Tom,
Yeah.
and not have to.
Give everybody a
amend
chance
it.
to see it. Yeah,
Yep.
that's excellent. Thank you.
Thanks.
Anything else on tonight's meeting? I know we've got 2 humongous packets for today. Okay, great. Now we can move on then to our sole solitary topic for work session today. And that is the Major Streets Transportation Improvement Program, MSTIP 2328 update. Clerk Moss, if you could bring in all the different presenters and speakers for this topic, that would be awesome. I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Chair Harrington and Commissioners. Glad to be back with you again today, our kind of monthly MSTIP check-in with you as we're moving through our process of developing a program for the 23-28 timeframe. So I'll do quick introductions. I have with me again Chris Steffenbach, our Senior Policy Analyst. Erin Wardell is going to walk us through the bulk of the presentation today. She's our Principal Transportation Planner. And we're happy to be joined again by John L. Bell, and he's going to talk a little bit about the summary of community engagement efforts in the process to date. And so with that, Erin, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon, Chair Harrington and members of the Board of Commissioners. I'm Erin Wardell, Principal Transportation Planner. So we have a number of different items to get through today, as you can see from the packet, but this is a really exciting time in our process because we're hoping at the end of the meeting today, we'll have achieved our milestone number 3, which is board direction to go forward with community engagement around our refined project list. So before we get there, we will be covering a summary of our community engagement activities to date. We're happy to have John L. here to cover that material for you. We'll be sharing the MSTIP historical allocation information as requested by members of the WCCC and members of the board. We'll be reviewing our process for how we evaluated all of the projects that were submitted and how we came up with our recommendation for the refined project list for your consideration. And then we'll be looking for direction from the board on that refined project list to move forward with community engagement. Next slide, please. So the policy questions we'll be revisiting at the end of this presentation are, does your board support the staff recommended project list, or would you like to request any modifications? And then does your board support moving forward with community engagement around this refined project list? Next slide. We wanted to start for maybe members of the public who are joining us, or as a reminder to anyone who's listening, about a little bit of history about the MSTIP program. So the Major Street Transportation Improvement Program, or MSTIP, is funded by county-wide property taxes and is used to improve major roads across the county. It's very unique to Washington County. We have funded since 1986 more than 150 multimodal projects that total actually about $952 million. We generally allocate MSTIP in 5-year funding cycles. MSTIP projects support our local economy. The system improvements are designed and built by local consultants and contractors, and they improve all of our mobility around the county. Projects are generally recommended by the Washington County Coordinating Committee, and final approval is with the Board of Commissioners. Next slide. One of the eligibility criteria for MSTIP funding is that the projects must be located on a road that's identified on our System of Countywide Interest map. This map is intended to reflect the major roads that serve a regional function in Washington County. It includes all county arterials and some collector facilities that we've determined serve that regional function. Next slide. It's important to keep in mind that MSTIP is just one step in building our transportation system. The first step is identifying projects in a transportation system plan. The second step is prioritizing funding, which is where MSTIP is. But there's two more steps before we finish building our system. The third step is project design, where we determine what a project should look like. And then finally, we move into construction. And that's when a project is finally available and providing benefit to our community. So just as a framing for where we are in the process of building our system, we are at step 2, prioritizing funding. And next slide. With that, we've now finished our review of MSTIP, and we're going to move into our review of phase 1 of community engagement. As you may recall, one of the things that's different about this funding allocation of MSTIP is that we deliberately created a phase 1 of community engagement around transportation system values. And we did a very strategic engagement with our community-based organizations, some of our communities who have not historically been involved in transportation funding decisions. And we have John L. Bell here from Espousal to cover these next set of slides to talk about the work that Espousal has been supporting us in doing.
Great, thank you, Erin. Chair Harrington, members of the board. Once again, John L. Bell with Espousal Strategies. We have been working with your team over the past several months to really deeply engage the community in this very exciting effort. As you'll note in the more comprehensive community engagement report, we'll highlight just a couple of elements from that report. One of the interesting things about the engagement relative to the MSTIP process is we also had an opportunity of working in close concert with your HB 2001 staff. And so a real robust conversation relative to the nexus of housing as well as transportation. But just as a reminder, some of the activities over the last 6 months included development of an equity framework, which has been used to really guide the way in which we did our targeted community outreach, partnerships with community-based organizations, a number of stakeholder briefings, both with community leaders as well as with a number of your jurisdictional partners. We held 2 listening sessions, 3 affinity group focus groups, 2 community workshops, and an online open house. We had about 122 community members engaged through listening sessions as well as focus groups and workshops, a very diverse set of folks, I might add, as well as 254 members of the community who engaged through the online open house. Next slide, please. We highlighted these themes in the past, but a couple of other themes, just a reminder in terms of that have come up, is around specific roads and geographic areas need improvements, improved access to public transit and public transit connectivity is something that has come up, improving active transportation, and of course, relieving congestion. Next slide. In the spirit of continuous improvement, all of this work is a journey, particularly as we embed equity in community engagement process. We did want to highlight just a few lessons learned that we would offer to all of you as well as to the county writ large, is to continue to build on the foundation of the equity framework and the community engagement plan. We worked with your team to really develop an intentional model that we think could serve other future engagement efforts. To leverage county expertise by partnership with LUT as well as the Office of Engagement in the Office of Equity and Community Engagement. To continue to deepen relationships, and the county is already doing a good job with this, but to further your interaction and relationships with your local community-based organizations. That has proven to be a good best practice, is really working with CBOs on various engagement activities. To adapt the project schedule to make time for meaningful engagement and to lean into the truth of past to forge a way to the future. As we learned in a number of our focus groups as well as listening sessions for a lot of our communities who may not have the best experience with government, there's a bit of rebuilding of trust that occurs. And so how do we lean into that, unpack it to forge a path forward is always part of the process. Next slide, please. And then a number of recommendations for the future, again, is to continue to use the equity framework and engagement plan as a model for future work, to fund additional staff positions to develop and sustain equitable engagement work, to ensure adequate budget for CBO partnerships and future work. As we all know, a lot of our CBOs receive so many requests by so many jurisdictions, and to the degree that the county is able to support their ability of engaging in meaningful ways is very, very helpful for internal capacity building. To build time into project schedules to allow for engagement activities throughout the timeline, and to incorporate equity throughout the LUT policy and planning engagement activities, technical processes, and decision-making. So with that, Erin, I believe I'm turning it back over to you.
Thank you. So we have some next steps. We're not done with our engagement. That was phase one. Now we're moving into phase two. And so again, after the board has a chance to review this information and tells us to go forward, we will be conducting another online open house tool around the refined project list. We are planning on being able to do in-person engagement at community events this summer. We have a few already lined up, including the county fair. So we're looking forward to those events and being able to engage directly with community members, which is something we haven't been able to do for the past 2 years. We'll also be continuing to develop relationships with our CBO partners as we go forward. We would like to be able to circle back with them as we go through this next phase of engagement and hear their input on the project list, and then continuing stakeholder briefings. And that could include our jurisdictional partners. We're looking forward to working with some of our chambers of commerce, for example, West Side Economic Alliance as well. And so we really want to have a broad stakeholder outreach with this online open house and offer briefings as appropriate. And we'll be continuing to work with John L. and his team for strategic consulting as we go forward to make sure that they're on board with our approach and that we are still working through our equity framework and some of the earlier work that we've established. So I'd like to pause here because that was a lot of information and see if we have any questions or clarifying comments before we go into the next piece.
Commissioners? No, I
Great.
think we're going to keep going.
We'll just keep going then. Next slide, please. So one of the questions we've been asked several times throughout this process is how have the historic MSTIP of funding allocations been spread throughout Washington County? And so on this slide, what you're seeing is a table that summarizes the expenditures by district, as well as a map showing our previous MSTIP project investments. One of the things we've learned in tracking our historic work is that we've been really strong in the allocation between the 4 districts over time. And so as you can see in the table, it's been pretty close to a quarter each. And you can see from the map graphic that we've had a pretty good dispersion throughout the county, including in the rural area, as well as in the urban area, of course. And so we think that we have been pretty good over time at allocating the funds between the 4 districts, and that has historically been an important principle for the Board of Commissioners. Of course, it is at the board's pleasure how they would like to allocate funds going forward, but this is what we've heard from the board throughout this process so far, and previous boards have made the same decision. So next slide.
Quick question on this slide.
Go ahead.
At the last WCC meeting when you were presenting, I think I had the same similar question, but then I had other questions that got in the way. But could you clarify, or could you just explain for our community and to our anybody who will be watching this slide, the dot and the line?
Oh, the dot reflects intersection projects. So intersections don't show up very well if we use a line. And so a line is usually used for a continuous roadway facility project, and we use a dot for an intersection.
Thank you.
Well, and the other thing I want to highlight is that this is an average over all of those, that entire time frame. But what I thought was really interesting was the chart. Oh, I can't tell you what PDF page it was in, but it was a page, it was the page 2 to this memo of the 3-page, where it wasn't until the 3E where there was this 25% across each of the districts. In the 2015, there was quite a variety. In 3D, it went from 17% to 32%. And in 3C, it went from 8% to 44%. So I think the message isn't that that 23 to 26 is the norm, because it isn't the norm. That's an average.
Right, and I think there have been some adjustments over time. So I think that if in one allocation, one district received more funds, then in the next allocation, that district may receive less funds.
It's all
but over
based
time,
on
it
need.
averaged out.
Yeah,
Right.
so
Yep.
I think the message should be flexibility and do exactly what we're doing of going through this process, as opposed to a message of, well, folks, we're only going to try and aim for 25% across all 4. I think this other chart that was in the package is far more illustrative, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's really important to note that over time it has been about equally allocated between the 4 districts, but each individual cycle may have been a little bit different depending on the needs at that time. In 3E, we did a very deliberate job of splitting it very equally between the 4 districts, and for a variety of reasons that may be difficult to do again. Next slide. So now we're going to segue and talk about the 23-28 project submittals. So overall, we received 33 projects for consideration, which is a very large number of projects. And so while we reviewed all of these projects and determined that they were eligible and then took them through our evaluation process, we knew that we would be coming back to the board, to the WCCC, and then the board asking for a project list refinement before we go out for community engagement, because 33 is just a lot to wrap your head around. And so I wanted to show all of the projects that were submitted first as a reminder for you. So we had, this is District 1 we're starting with. And so District 1 had the most projects submitted. We had 12 projects submitted in District 1. As you can see, they're generally dispersed throughout the district. Oh, and I should point out too, the blue layer you're seeing on this map underneath the projects is our equity index, which we developed as a part of our equity framework that we developed earlier this year. And the equity index is intended to show geographically areas of the county with the most need. Next slide, please. So this slide is showing our District 2 projects. We had 7 projects submitted for funding in District 2. Next slide. The next slide shows our District 3 projects, and I believe there were 8 projects submitted for funding in District 3. And then next slide. And we had 6 projects submitted for funding in District 4. So of the 33 projects, there was only 1, and that was a District 3 project that we determined was ineligible for project funding based on the eligibility criteria the board had approved, and that's because it was project proposed for a plan, and one of our eligibility criteria was that a project has to already be adopted into a plan. So that project's just a little bit early for funding. It can come back at some point in the future. So next slide. So once I'm going to now walk through how we evaluated the projects once we received them. So we completed our technical evaluations of the projects and compared them to the evaluation criteria that the board approved at your April 5th meeting. And the development of that evaluation criteria was very much informed by our phase 1 community engagement with our community and gathering information about the community's values and what was important to them in our transportation system. Next slide. We then reviewed our evaluation results with our Washington County Coordinating Committee's Transportation Advisory Committee. So these are the transportation planners and engineers from the cities. And we had an opportunity to share our evaluation with them. And then we asked them to do some homework for us. And that was to consider the eligibility criteria and the outcomes of the program, and then allocate $40 million per commissioner district, approximately $40 million per commissioner district. And then, considering our 5 desired outcomes, select 5 projects overall that best implement those outcomes. So based on the WCCC tax homework assignment, they recommended a refined list of projects for your consideration. At that meeting, they reviewed the county's refined list of projects, and they requested to include 2 additional projects, which was design-only funding for the Allen Boulevard Complete Street project and design-only funding for the 185th Avenue Complete Street project. Next slide. We also convened our community-based organization leadership workshop earlier this month. And at that workshop, we had the opportunity to convene leadership from the Muslim Educational Trust, Unite Oregon, Community Action, the Street Trust, and Oregon Walks. And what was really interesting about convening this group is that these were the same community-based organizations we had been engaged with throughout this process. And so we had already developed some background information for the MSTIP program. They had a little bit of grounding in it. They had given us feedback on the values, and now was their opportunity to also review the project evaluation information. What we found was really valuable was that people came into this workshop with that base level of knowledge. And so they were really ready to engage around the project list and give us some very complete feedback on these projects. And so they reviewed our technical project evaluation information, and we asked them to, based on their understanding of the program outcomes and their organizations and what they know about the community through their organizations, to prioritize their top 3 projects per commissioner district. And then we compiled that information along with the tax information to take back to the Washington County Coordinating Committee. Next slide. So we shared that information with our County Coordinating Committee, and they had a very good discussion about all of the information we had shared with them. Their discussion was primarily focused on District 3 projects, actually, and there was a lot of consideration around, should we consider at least design-only funding for the Boones Ferry Road project if we're going to consider construction funding for the Basalt Creek Parkway extension, knowing that once that extension is constructed, there will be additional transportation need on Boones Ferry Road. So we did include that in their recommendation, was to include design for Boones Ferry Road. I think one of the most interesting parts of that discussion was underscoring that all of these submitted projects are worthy. They're all identified in plans. That means they've already been prioritized. We know they're important. We just don't have enough money to build all of these projects. So the discussion needs to be, what projects are ready to be funded right now in this time frame with this limited funding source. We also talked about the importance of identifying construction dollars once we funded a project for design. So really carrying things through, once we've committed through the design, that we will find construction dollars so that we can complete that project. So it was a very good, very thorough discussion of the project list. And the WCCC ended up with a recommendation for the board. As I said, they agreed with the TAC, but they wanted to add design funding for the Boones Ferry Road project. Next slide. So I wanted to take a moment and explain a little bit more about the various types of projects that you see proposed, because there's really 3 different types of projects that you're going to see here. The first are projects proposed for match. So these are projects that we expect to be funded primarily through another funding source besides MSTIP. These are generally really large dollar projects. So matching funds are intended to be our local share, either to make us eligible for a grant opportunity or to bring money to the table to match with something that's maybe not a competitive opportunity, but won't fully fund the project. So these dollars are not necessarily, or these projects are not necessarily guaranteed to go forward. It's a little bit of a risk with a match dollar program. program, oftentimes these will be competitive or it will be negotiated. But it's important to keep in mind that the match dollars alone will not build any of these projects. We'll need to find those other funds. The second type of project proposed are projects proposed for design funding. Design funding pays for preliminary engineering design. It does not pay for the construction. When a project has that preliminary design work completed, it can move quickly into final design and construction. So sometimes funding some projects for design is a really good use of public funds, because then we have projects that are closer to being shovel ready than they would have been without this preliminary design work. It also shows that we are identifying that a project is important, but we're not quite ready to construct it yet. And then the third type of project is construction. And so construction dollars will pay for final design, because projects typically do not proceed into final design until they have construction dollars. It will pay for right-of-way acquisition, project management, permitting, and then finally actual construction of the project. So when projects are funded for construction, we expect to see shovels in the ground, project ready for use, and opening in our transportation system. So I want to pause there and see if there's any questions at this point before we move on. Chair Harrington.
Thank you, Erin. So I thought I'd ask this question now instead of later. And so I'm trying to find the project list. Here we go. So in the memo that starts on page 34, there's an attachment that lists different projects using these definitions. And I appreciate that in several of them, it talks about preliminary design is already funded.
Mhm.
So construction there seems to go with this definition. Where I do have questions though is where the description in multiple cases across district 2, 3, and 4, where the description doesn't indicate what level of design's been done. For example, it says new sidewalks, pedestrian crossings, bike lanes, street lighting, and center turn lanes. So is that to say it's going to be implemented? There's no question around whether it's 2 through lanes with a center turn lane, or thinking back to the Bethany Boulevard extension, and I'm really sensitive to design being hidden within construction scoping. So that's why I figured I'd ask the question now, because it comes up in multiple projects where it says it's just construction.
Mhm.
And are all those constructions really, is it truly final design? So early design has already been done, or are we just relying upon the things like the urban road maintenance design standards to say that's the design, which allows everything from 3 to 5 lanes?
I think I understand what you're asking. So unless it says in the project description that the project has already been funded for design, then those construction dollars would cover the entire work. So it would cover the preliminary design phase, which would include those decisions about how many lanes does this road need to be, where do we need turn lanes, what traffic analysis has been done. So some projects have already had that level of preliminary design, but not all projects have, and it's not a requirement. In fact, oftentimes jurisdictions just, quite frankly, don't have any money to do that preliminary design, so it won't get done.
So this is exactly the comment that I made in our prior top discussions about this, that construction for some of these
Mhm.
is preliminary design and final design and construction,
Mhm.
which is a different definition than what this one leads to.
Mhm.
Okay, which is why I'm really glad I finally figured out how to state the question to reveal that hidden property.
Mhm.
So I now understand what the definition is, even though I don't think it matches page 21. That's all. That's all I was trying to get clear on. Thank you, because I've tried to make sure that we have maximum flexibility
Mhm.
to move forward with project advancement, because there are some projects that frankly just, I want to, I'll hold my comments to later. I really will. I just wanted to make sure I understood the definition as
Mhm.
achieved. And you've accomplished that. Thank you.
Stephen, did you want to jump in?
No, I think we can come back to it later.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. I was just going to add one thing about the question that you asked, which is what design do we go forward with? And when we do the preliminary design for any project, we do go through a process of determining what that design should be. We also have a project going on now to update our road design and construction standards, and we would expect that the updated design standards would be in place before the 23-28 MSTIP projects are moving forward. And so we will have a lot more conversations about design standards going forward as well. Next slide, please. Can we go to the next slide? It might be a little bit delayed in advancing our slides.
We're trying to get to slide 22.
There we go. So all of that information put together, having done the project evaluations, having had the conversations with the WCCC TAC, with our CBO leaders, and with the WCCC, we have included the recommendations that came from the TAC and the WCCC and added them to our staff recommended project list. And so for District 1, we are recommending that 7 projects move forward for community engagement. These 7 projects do include a mix of projects identified for construction, 2 projects identified for design, and then 1 project that would be a match for potential federal or state funds, and that's the Farmington Road project. On this slide, we did include that asterisk next to the construction project type description that says construction funding includes the final design and right-of-way acquisition as well. So I want to pause here and see if we have any questions on the District 1 refined project list recommendation. Okay, next slide, please. So for our District 2 project recommendation, we do have a change from when we went to the Washington County Coordinating Committee. And that change is that in our staff recommendation before that meeting, we did not include the Saltzman Road project, and that had to do with the results of our technical evaluation. However, one of the important points with our WCCC conversation was around the importance of advancing projects that have been funded for design. And the Saltzman Road project was funded for preliminary design and partial construction of the eastern alignment of the road. With the board's conversation last week showing a preference for that western alignment of Saltzman Road, which would require additional funding, and the importance of keeping projects moving forward once they have been funded for design, staff determined that we should include the Saltzman Road project in our recommendation to you today. So you will see the Saltzman Road project is now included in the list. We also have 2 projects here proposed for match. That's the Southwest 185th Avenue light rail overcrossing and the Beaverton Hillsdale Olson Road intersection, which is a tricky project, as well as 3 segments of Walker funded for construction, or proposed for construction, I should say. Any questions on District 2? Okay, moving into next slide. So our District 3 recommendation for outreach, this is 6 projects. As I said before, the Boones Ferry Road project is now included on there for design based on the WCCC's recommendation. We have 4 other projects proposed for construction and Basalt Creek Parkway proposed for a match. Any questions on District 3? Okay, moving into District 4 on the next slide. So for District 4, we actually did not make any cuts to the proposed project list because, as I've said before, our District 4 jurisdictions were very restrained and very strategic in which projects they submitted. So we had 6 submitted, all were determined to be eligible, and so they're all included to move forward for community engagement, and all 6 of these projects would be for construction dollars. So any questions on District 4? Okay, so we'll move on to our next slide. So here we are at our recommendation. The staff recommendation for the board today is to discuss our recommended refined project list and then to direct staff to begin community engagement using the refined project list. And our next slide comes back to those policy questions that we asked at the beginning, which is, does your board support this project list? Do you have any refinements to it or modifications? And do you support moving forward with community engagement? Before we get to the discussion, I'd actually like to show the next slide briefly, which is our timeline, just in case we run out of time at the end and forget to come back here. So the important thing to note is that we are here where the blue box is. If the board directs staff today to begin engagement, which we hope you do, we will have achieved milestone 3 of our MSTIP funding allocation process. And we have completed all of the work leading up to now, including that phase 1 community engagement. So this is a big milestone reflecting a tremendous amount of work and coordination. And we're pretty pleased with how it's been going so far, but we're really looking forward to hearing your feedback on our refined project list. So if we can jump back to the previous slide, that would be great. Thank you. And we can also jump back to any of the district lists as we have this discussion.
Commissioners, who wants to dive into the deep end first? It's summertime. Go ahead, Commissioner Willie. I remember doing a lot of pool swimming when I was a kid in the summer.
Aaron, there was a conversation that I heard just kind of peripherally, I don't know, a few weeks ago, that the project that you have from District 2 on the 185th overpass, because that actually touches District 4 as well. There was some conversation about splitting that between the two. Was that discussed at all at the TAC?
We haven't had those conversations about dollar amounts and how it may all play out. As we talked about a little bit earlier in the presentation, it's the board's decision on how to allocate the funds. And so if the board is most comfortable showing that dollar amount split between 2 or 3 districts, we can certainly show it that way. There's some precedent. We've done that before with projects that cross multiple districts or are determined to serve multiple districts for a variety of reasons. So that really is something for the board to consider doing. Because we're not done with our cost estimating work, we have a consultant on board to independently review all of our cost estimates. We really haven't had much of a conversation around the dollar amounts just yet.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. Aaron, in regard to this process as you're conducting it this year, let me use an example of District 4 and District 2. I mean, vastly different numbers of dollars and projects. And as you can see from our historical methodology of trying to somewhat equalize, but it's not always perfect. And it's interesting that, you know, some districts have received more and some less over, you know, the entire frame of these. What's going to happen in your mind if District 2, which I think is in excess of $100 million in projects, let's say they can't get it down to less than 50 million, cut it in half. Does that mean that District 4 is safe in this process because they have their 40 million, or will we look for $10 million of cuts in other districts to try to find good projects? Another way of saying all of this, when you bring this back, to this board to make some determination. Are you going to have an excess of the dollars that you have to spend, and we're going to have to make those cuts, or where are they? Who's going to make that? I know we'll make the final decision, but what are you going to bring to us? I don't understand what you're going to bring to us exactly.
Staff are intending to bring forward a project proposal that is roughly equal between the commissioner districts. Now, the numbers may not work out perfectly, so we're going to go through this engagement process and determine what projects are being prioritized, and then we'll be making a recommendation. I think what's more likely to happen is that some districts will just have less projects. We may only be able to fund 2 projects in one district because they might be very expensive projects that are prioritized, whereas maybe another district will get 4 projects. So I think it's really a function of how expensive the projects are, not necessarily the number of projects.
Let me restate it. You got roughly $160 million to deal with in a period of time. Are you going to bring this board $160 million of projects as recommendations? Are you going to say, we couldn't get down, we're down to 200 million, you guys get to, that's lucky 5, we're going to make those cuts? What is your intention to bring to this board?
My intention was to try to stick to that $160 million pretty closely when we bring that recommendation to you. That being said, I think it's going to be a pretty tough decision, so I think the board probably will have to weigh in on that.
Then my second question is on the opportunity funds. I didn't see those exactly spelled out in any of this. Where are those at?
We haven't had that conversation yet, so that's something that we are looking forward to bringing to the board, I think in 2 months. And so we'll be talking about, I think our intent has been to bump up the amount of opportunity funds from last time, hopefully, because it's been such a popular program and such a great way to bring additional funds to Washington County. We'll also be looking at a proposal to continue our rural bridges funding and our intelligent transportation system funding. So we'll be bringing that back to the board in a couple of months for your consideration.
But just for full disclosure, you still only have 160 million roughly, right? You don't have 160 plus the opportunity fund.
We think that we do. So we think we have 160 million for projects and then additional funding for the programmatic allocations.
Okay, so you do build that in.
Yes.
Okay, and my final one is we've had a great track record at the county of having some involvement in all of this, and I know you still are. Are you guiding this process a bit? I know you're going out to outreach and you're doing a number of things to include many voices, but is the county still the principal voice, or is there some other voices? I mean, and you say, well, what would that look like? I mean, you're not saying to each of the city mayors, for instance, you run your own program and come back with information. You're running the entire outreach program, right? The county?
Correct. We are.
All right. Thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you.
And I would just add, we are certainly coordinating our outreach efforts with our city partners to help get the word out about the efforts.
Commissioner Fye, I think you're the only one who hasn't weighed in on these 2 questions.
Yes, Chair Harrington, thank you. Aaron, great job. This has been quite the journey for me to be on this MSTIP allocation and the community engagement and the equity focus. So kudos to Stephen Roberts and your staff. And I'm really impressed how far we've come and where we're going. In terms of, to answer your question number 1, yes, I do support this list, and I'm happy to support to submit this list to the community engagement. So yes, thumbs up for me.
Thank you.
And I do have there was a one I didn't see it on Aaron, if I don't know if you could speak to it. There was some comments around some of the community-based organizations that filter the lens at WCCC. Do you want to touch on that just so our, and then also could you touch on like how would that community engagement be different than that last one?
Yeah, I think that the conversation at the WCCC around our community-based organizations had to do with the fact that there was some concern about, do those groups actually represent Washington County voices, right? And so to my knowledge, they do. We were very strategic in working with these organizations and developing their knowledge. And many of the people who came, even though their leadership staff from those community-based organizations actually live in Washington County or work in Washington County. And so they have quite a bit of experience with our facilities. I think some people were maybe a little bit perplexed that some projects hadn't scored higher than others. And they're all good projects. And we asked our community-based organization leaders to pick their top 3 in each district. So if we'd asked them to pick your top 4, or pick your top 5, the numbers would have turned out differently. But we picked a limit of 3 and the numbers worked out the way that they did. So I think it was really successful how we engaged with our CBO leaders for this project. I think what worked well was the fact that we had engaged with those groups several times since January. And so they came to that meeting with a lot of knowledge about MSTIP. Again, I think if we went back to them and asked slightly different questions, we would get slightly different answers, but it's certainly a model that I would replicate going forward because I think it was a really successful conversation.
Thank you. Well summarized.
Okay, thank you. I'll go last. I first want to start by saying a big thank you. There is a lot of work that went into putting together all this information and getting us to this 3rd milestone. I appreciate the care that has been put into this. Care by Washington County staff and our consultants on this, city staff as well, the WCCC TAC, the WCCC electeds, and all of the community-based organizations and community members who have contributed to this slate of information. Job well done on these memos as well. Ms. Wardell, I really appreciate the memo on pages 34 through 36 of the packet from yesterday. Especially, I want to particularly make note of on page 3 of the memo, so of page 36 of 229, under the paragraph section heading WCCC discussion and recommendation. Let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, about 8 lines in, it's a sentence that starts, members discussed how all the projects are worthy and it is difficult to explain their importance to the community. And then it goes on. Members also discussed the importance of identifying construction dollars once a project is designed. So I really wanted to highlight that first sentence, discussion of how the projects are worthy and that it's difficult to explain their importance to the community, particularly when cost estimates sometimes vary. I think that's really an important point that we need to ensure that our community members have the message of hearing. A few very simple, crisp statements. We have all kinds of transportation needs. For this program, we have more projects than we have funding for. And we're trying to select projects that work for the community now. So it isn't about debating, is this a good project or not? My goodness, we have a lot of slicing and dicing here. I want to make sure that as we go through this community engagement, that we have those crisp messages, both for the face-to-face summer events, right?
Mhm.
As well as stakeholder meetings and the online forum. And what underlines this for me, I want to make sure that we don't make the community fit the design, but that we make the design fit the community. Okay, so this is where getting community input is necessary, it's important, and as we move through the subsequent phases, you staff members know this better than I've been on the outside to date, but it's going to be another valuable set of information of the multiple sets we currently have. So, wow. But I'm trying to look on my checkoff list. That messaging, right? We have more projects than we have money for. We really have to make that clear. And it got me wondering if, much like polling, you know, when we do polling for a ballot, potential ballot, we do polling with what information people already know today, and then we inform them, and then we ask them again what their thoughts are. I wondered if we should go out to the community, or one aspect of, maybe it's just online, or I don't know, is have a list of projects just with the descriptions and no dollar amounts. And I think you've probably done this with like a single dollar, a double dollar, and a triple dollar sign. But I'm wondering if it might tell us anything about the need for the community if we didn't have dollar signs at all, and leave all that dollar business to us wonks through this process.
Mhm.
I don't know. I certainly don't want to hold the process up. I do value and I appreciate how these cost estimates will be re-examined by, I think it was Kittleson and Associates through one of the
Correct.
memos.
Mhm.
That's great. I really appreciate that. Just looking over my notes here, I want to come back to on design costs. Why I'm being a stickler on what's the state of design on a project, has preliminary been done versus moving forward with construction costs that include both preliminary design and final design. Why I've asked for design to be pulled out separately is for two reasons. One is just to be prepared so that we have the option of moving forward with multiple projects, even though we may not have enough construction dollars, right? My thinking there was, could we move forward with design, given that we don't have enough money to do all the construction and get more projects ready for further down the line? I don't know, but I figured if I didn't ask for it, I couldn't have it for later. So that's why I've been asking for that. And the other one is this underlying that I don't want to propagate, or rather I don't want to support a situation where the community feels like we're trying to cram transportation solutions into their community without that community involvement on the design. And, you know, it goes to that statement I read earlier, don't make the community fit the design, make the design fit the community. And each of our city councils is in a different place with regard to their involvement with community design based upon how constituents in their city are holding them accountable, right? So I know it's complicated, believe me. So just trying to make sure we have some flexibility. And then on the memo of the historic allocations on page 2, which is the chart that has MSTIP 1, 2, 3, B, C, D, high, the cost sharing, and then 3E. Here are a couple of other thoughts. Geography is a guide, but it's not a rule, right? And I think that is my crisp articulation of what Commissioner Rogers has been getting at. We try to balance across districts, but it's not an absolute. Because after all, as I reminded myself, we could slice and dice the dollars based upon the revenue generated by district, right? It's all property tax generated, right? We could distribute based on that. But that undermines it, that neglects to acknowledge the fact that people live regionally. That means they travel all over the county. So just because, for example, I live in the city of Beaverton, I travel all over Washington County. So that's not, that would not be great. We could do it based on population, but we already know that that was out of whack, not just for this reapportionment, but the prior one. There's a reason why the board changed the threshold down to 3%. So that's silly. We could also slice it by the proportional miles of the roads of county significance by district. Oh, good heavens. Why slice it and dice it all that way, right? Is it going to lead to a better decision? Well, I would argue this isn't about a better decision. There are so many needs for transportation and not enough funding. No matter what decision we make, it will be a good decision. So I'm not at all concerned about that. I know I got a little long-winded, but I wanted all of my colleagues to have the opportunity to hear my thinking on this. I do have one question. I do know that at some point from my community advocate days, so from 2014 onwards, that there was a decision made, but I don't know if it was MSTIP 3B or 3C, where there used to be city allocations where each city got a certain portion of MSTIP dollars for use in their cities. And I remember this because Mayor Drake was involved with it. So I know it had to be either 3B or 3C because his tenure ended as of 2009. And the reason for my asking is that were the district allocation dollars just the county projects, or did that also include the distribution to the cities? I don't need the answer today. It's just fine. Okay. But I am curious about that. Ultimately, I just have two more comments. Ultimately, where I stand, I'm fine with taking all this information and going out for public engagement with this refined list, okay? But seeing all this information, there was a lot here for this work session, and I appreciated all of it. It was all really good learning. But it caused me to reach back to find that map of the roads of what I call the roads of county significance, right? Which you gave us, oh, so much for virtual backgrounds. You gave us in our work session packet of December 7th, 2021. I think I was trying to imagine your different public engagement forums, right? Online, in-person summer events, stakeholder meetings, CBO forums. This map is meaningful to me. Sorry. Because it gets us to focus on the needs here in Washington County. This isn't about people's neighborhood streets. And so it helps, I think, as a good reminder of what the project scope is, in order to invite people in to put Post-its on at a farmer's market, or remind ourselves that we travel throughout the county, and in order for each of us to live our own unique lives, we rely upon a network for ourselves, our family members, our fellow colleagues, employees, and the goods and services that we rely upon, right? I have groceries I get at different grocery stores, and those products have to get to those stores. So, so I think I really debated with myself to include this very last comment, and that was, for those who are really into this, if you might want to point them to this online packet, because you did a lot of thinking. A lot of thinking and input went into this. And for those who are really wondering, well, how come thus and such road project didn't make it? It's because of all this careful work that you've put into it. And by you, I mean the greater you that I was talking about. That's all. So thank you very much for listening to all of my comments. And I join my colleagues in being in support of moving forward with these projects. And I forgot to mention that I also appreciated reading here in my papers, all the lessons learned and the recommendations for future engagement as provided in the Long Range Community and Transportation Planning Community Engagement Final Report. So thank you, John L., to you and Aaron for that memo as well, and the document. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chair.
Commissioners, now that we've each had a round one, any other thoughts, comments that you want to contribute? No? Okay, well, job well done, staff.
Great, thank you so much, Chair. And I did want to just note, we take your point about being really clear about the preliminary and final design, so we will modify the list as we take that out for our public engagement outreach events and be more specific and clear about that. So thank you for that feedback.
Great. All righty. I don't know if later on, if we would have wished that we distinguished for more of them, just having a design step only versus the other, but you know, food for future programs. That'll be 29 and beyond.
Great. Well, thank you all for your time and excellent feedback today.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay. I think that brings us, brings us to the end of the posted agenda, but that means we want to come back to the Interstate Bridge project memo. What have you got for us?
Okay, Clerk Moss, are you able to screen share the document that I sent, or if I have permission, I can screen share? Okay, well, let me try to share. Oh, nope, I don't have permission.
You try now, Stephen.
Great. Ah, thank you so much. Okay. Oh dear, I have too many things open. Okay. Tell you what, I will share with you the red line version. Are you seeing a Word document with red lines? Oh dear.
I'm not seeing something on my screen yet.
Okay. Well, and
It
you
says
all.
you're trying to share it, but it's not coming across.
Oh
It's
dear.
just
Okay. Let me. Oh no, I may be having Zoom problems again today.
Can you email it to Clerk Moss?
I have, yeah, he has it. So if you're able
Actually,
to.
I can see it.
Oh, can you?
It
I'm
has
in the building and I can't see it.
Hmm.
Neither can Ms. Angie. Neither can Roy. Neither can Commissioner Fye. Sorry.
I'm the only one that gets it.
And I apologize if you're all frozen right now for me, so I may need to leave the meeting. And so, oh, okay, I'm out now. I'm back out of screen sharing. Okay, so maybe Clerk Moss, are you able to? Thank you so much.
Woohoo!
Okay, so we highlighted the additional text that you see down at the bottom, and then we have clarified the name of the committee to make sure that we have it right. It would be the Joint Interim Committee on the Interstate 5 Bridge, which is a committee of the Oregon Legislature.
Sorry, Stephen. Could you zoom in a little bit?
With Adobe, it won't show the same if I change it. So I can try, but it will cut off some of the other parts.
Yeah, I think it's fine if we can.
Yeah, let's give it a whirl. We're really trying to zero in on the yellow part. So if you can scroll to that, that'd be excellent. Does that help, Commissioner Fye? Yep. Okay, great. I know I'm good with this.
I still would like to see one word change, and that would be, or added, and that would see, create a functional multimodal transportation system for the future long-term needs of the region. It doesn't change what we're doing, doesn't change anything, it just sends a message. So I would like to see between the and long, the future long-term needs of the region.
I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with that.
I am too, because this project is supposed to address the needs of today and out. So
I just want to say one thing more. I am not opposed to the LPA. I never have been, but I like the idea of messaging so that we can hopefully this time bring our business community and others along and understand the constraints that we all are faced with. Tom Bryan used to say, everything that needs to be said has been said, but not everybody has said it. And so that's kind of what I'm reacting to. And I think that by adding that language with and putting in the word the future long-term needs of the region, we can say that, we're not insensitive and we're listening. But beyond that, I'm fine too.
Okay, I think we can make that one edit, and we will get that letter over to Clerk Moss for the chair's signature.
Perfect.
Thank you all.
okay, commissioners, anything else for today for work session? Ms. Angie, Mr. Carr? Mr. Jockers, anything else for tonight's meeting?
I would like Clerk Moss to provide an update just on the packet changes that have occurred since our discussion earlier today.
Thank you, Ms. Angie. So Chair Harrington, Board, so we have updated and reflected the changes that we have made this afternoon. Staff has made the change to action item F3 with the requested changes. So that is now online for the public and the board to review in advance of tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Clerk Moss.
Great. Anything else for today? Seeing none, I adjourn today's work session of June 28th, 2022. We'll see you at 6:30. See ya.